Okay, so I have Barak Austin here. Barak, how you doing?
Pretty good. How about you, Brandon?
Good. So, just a bit of background on your education you want to go over. You went to Wright State for a bit.
I went to college for 7 years in total and
Okay.
still don't have a bachelor's degree.
That sounds like me, except I found a way around it.
I'm working on it. I'm close. I just, depression, hey? Depression.
It's a meme now, right?
Yeah, except I actually got diagnosed.
So,
I also am on the autism spectrum, if we want to go there too.
yeah,
So
that's good.
I have a little bit of a different outlook on social things than
good
others
to know.
might.
So you've studied a lot of international studies is your main focus.
That's true.
Topic for today is going to be imperialism first, and then we're going to talk about the Iraq War because that's a fun topic to talk about, right?
Oh, it's so
People.
much. Yeah, so just everyone's favorite topic of discussion, the Iraq War.
No. So I guess we'll start with specifics and move to generalities here.
Let me open my notes.
Yeah, go ahead. So specifically, about 17% of the British Raj died as a result of the British occupation, right? But the Raj was not really industrialized at all before the occupation, and even now, only half of all Indians have plumbing inside their home, like toilets, and a weird stat is a larger percent of them have smartphones than toilets. So that's interesting. And if we want to say so. If we're wanting to talk about imperialism, we have to, if we're going to say that it's bad in general, we have to say that India would be better off having not lost, 17% of the population. Even though if they didn't get colonized, there would be, there would have been less railroads and just less infrastructure in general, which infrastructure is good in that it reduces human suffering, basically.
So what are you positing? Because you threw a lot of points out there all at once. And so what are you positing here? What are we actually discussing?
So I guess I'm pushing back against the general conception that imperialism was just this dark, terrible thing that had no benefits across the board to anyone. And I'll admit that it was bad. I know I'm defending people who literally chopped off people's arms because they didn't farm enough rubber in Indonesia.
So I think imperialism is a really broad subject to bring up in a context like this, because imperialism as a whole was undergone in various ways during.
It was a mixed bag between nations. Yeah.
So it's hard to speak. I'll try to speak broadly on it, but it's hard to make very sweeping definitive statements when you have everything from the Japanese invasion of Indochina.
Yeah.
And
which was totally brutal with no benefits.
Yeah, it was
no benefits
to the British Raj, as you mentioned, or other British occupations too, where yes, imperialist thought dictated that the British were superior in a lot of ways, but there were also a lot of benefits. So there's quite a big spectrum there, and it's hard to.
If we're going to say imperialism was justified, it's kind of weird to do these looking back on historical events and saying if this happened, it would have been justified. But
so what do you mean by justified?
So if we can show that the British colonization and the subsequent railroadization of the country prevented more deaths than it caused, could we look at that and just say it's a good thing?
Okay, what's your definition of good?
Because something that we're not sad happened, I guess.
So I think it's possible to be both sad that something happened and acknowledge that it is that I'm about to throw out another big word or another contentious word here. Evils occurred, because public health has gotten better. In India, child mortality rates worldwide have gone down in the last 50 years because of the tertiary and quaternary effects of imperialism. So, just from that, if you look at it just from that perspective, you can see that, the effects of industrialization, which is not necessarily imperialism, but is somewhat linked, and imperialism as well did bring greater knowledge and greater improvements to those cultures and those geographic regions as well that were imperialized.
In terms of like networks, it seems like it's a good, just on the basis of that it expanded the world network. So it's bringing vast different cultures together, albeit some less receiving less benefits than others. But just that coming together of ideas is, I would say, valuable because it's you get new ideas formed that way, and I mean it's the only way to I guess rise all the tides is to actually have an integrated network in which information and goods can flow, right?
Right, like knowledge has spread and shifted, and the synergy between different cultures has allowed improvements in sciences and technology and the like. But it is hard to overlook the exploitative elements of what happened as well. People, like, you had people whose arms were cut off in Indonesia, I believe it was Indonesia, in the East Indies region by probably the Dutch.
I think
or the
it was
French.
It was the Dutch, yeah.
Who ran rubber plantations and would chop people's arms off if they weren't productive enough. Or a place like the British Raj, where you had a forced famine to support the British war effort during World War II even.
Is that pretty much the cause of it?
Churchill basically decided, hey, we're going to force them to be on starvation rations so we can support the war machine.
That makes sense.
Which was a choice that he made, and we won the war, but at what cost? The good and the bad come together on this topic, alongside a lot of other topics like this. Human endeavor generally tends to come with positive impacts and negative impacts, and it is in fact the crux of the issue that we are discussing, in deciding how to balance the good in quotation marks and the bad, and it's hard to put a value on human life in both cases, in both directions. A thought occurred to me a couple minutes ago when we were talking with the networks that you were describing. Those networks have allowed trade and knowledge spread and cultural interactions, but they've also, especially in the increasingly globalized world that we live in now, which again is a quaternary probably impact of imperialism. Now you have things like, worldwide pandemics that can happen that before would have been geographically isolated. Mm-hmm. Had we not spread out and intertwined so closely, instead of bubonic plague being isolated to Europe, now if we, and oh boy, don't get me started on the number of biological weapons that were created by Russia and China and the U.S. during the Cold War. Also Japan during World War II. Any of those got out, it's not just going to be a European problem or a South American problem or an Asian problem. It's going to be a worldwide problem. Unless people really close down borders really hard, we stop global trade, pandemics are going to happen. They're going to be a consequence of the interconnected nature of the world. Is it likely? No, because we have pretty good detection systems in place. You'll notice Ebola didn't spread worldwide. But by the same token, there are smaller consequences of that interconnectedness that are not. Those are the cost of the interconnectedness, is vulnerability.
Yeah, not even like diseases either. It's like the 2008 market crash in America. I mean, pretty much everyone is affected by that.
Still recovering,
which
somewhat, yeah.
Which it's. I mean, I'm okay with that if that means that everyone's boat gets raised a little bit. And I guess.
I mean, the problem is now, if things are going up, everybody's going up, and if things are going down, everybody's going down, which is a good thing and a bad thing, depending on whether things are going up or down. Again, we're throwing around good and bad like we have straightforward definitions of those things, but we don't. And we'll just acknowledge that now and move forward.
So I guess the the question of imperialism, I guess, is that how do you unite disparate peoples who have totally different ideologies, cultures, technology, and just thought processes in general, which we can certainly point to like the rape of Nanking when Japan invaded China and be like, that's probably not good, right? Like,
That's what we call sublimation.
yeah,
That's not a mixture. That is called a suppression and a sublimation of one culture over another, or at least attempted sublimation. Because
So-
in that instance, the Japanese tried to sublimate Chinese culture, but didn't work. They got into not into China. What is that province over there?
I think it was Manchukuo and Manchuria.
Manchuria. That's what I was looking for.
Vassals.
Yeah. So like Manchuria got captured, but then returned.
Yeah.
It's no longer Japanese held territory, and it remained Japanese held territory. It never, at least to my knowledge, it wasn't like Japan turned it into a new area of Japan. It was very much just an occupied area.
Yeah.
But to go back to your original point there, it's the mixing of cultures is something that has to be done delicately and carefully and intentionally. If it's done unintentionally or without care for being intentional about actually allowing both cultures to mix and merge,
Gradual too.
Gradually,
I think
yeah.
is key.
I wish I had a culinary metaphor here, because I know there are culinary metaphors out there, but you guys out in podcast land can just pretend.
And you have to saute them together. Is that like low heat?
No.
To saute the cultures together. Or is it
I was
high heat?
thinking more like, what is that? Making a hollandaise sauce.
Oh, I just had hollandaise sauce today.
You have to
What is
mix you have to mix the eggs in slowly, so that they don't cook. Because otherwise you just have scrambled eggs.
it? Yeah.
And that's somewhat the way that cultures have to mix. You have to mix them slowly and deliberately, with regard to the two cultures. Because trying to let me posit a strange alternate universe where China and the U.S. have decided to form one nation for some godforsaken reason. I love China. Hi, China. I know you're listening. We love you over here in the U.S. We like buying your goods. Please don't let Trump screw everything up for us. But let's say we were trying to merge Chinese culture and Japanese culture, Japanese culture. Goodness gracious, American culture. How would we go about doing that? Because we can't just transplant half of China's population into America and vice versa. That ain't gonna work.
Yeah.
You have linguistic differences, you have religious differences, you have cultural differences, just in the ordering. China, at least up until recently, if not still today, has a much more strictly hierarchical structure still. This is the land of emperors and figures of power and authority.
Yeah.
Whereas America was founded ostensibly
An
and
objection
still
to that, basically.
basically an objection to that idea. Yeah. And if you went and talked to a Chinese person, they wouldn't explicitly know that, but it's ingrained in the culture.
It's implicit, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a collectivist culture too.
Yeah.
So
Whereas rugged idealist America or individualist America would so you have a cultural clash there that would be very, very difficult to rectify. And so the way it normally works is the two cultures metaphorically beat the crap out of each other until one wins. The only other way to solve it that's seemed to work so far is slow and deliberate understanding by everyone involved that, hey, we need to figure out a way to live together. Like what happened in at least some respects in South Africa after apartheid ended, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions and the peaceful, the relatively peaceful power transferred peacefully once the whites decided that they were going to
More peaceful than the apartheid.
Yeah.
which is a high bar.
Yeah.
Or low bar, depending on how you look at it.
I mean, it didn't quite hit all-out civil war, which, that's a decent way to be like, hey, we didn't go all-out civil war on this thing, because that would have been a mess. Holy crap. But you look at how things have and haven't resolved themselves, because you had a very segregated set of you had a South African culture, but there were some pretty distinct subcultures there that have had to try to figure out how to merge. Somewhat successfully. There's still lots of problems there that are admitted to, but they're working on it, and they are trying to go about it at least somewhat intentionally. And it worked out decently well. Whites were not massacred post-transfer of power.
So I think implicit in that, we're probably going to talk about this a bit later, but implicit in that is if you're agreeing that cultures need to mingle, you're agreeing that some ideas are going to win and some ideas are going to lose.
Or both ideas lose and the third is
yeah,
emerges from the ashes.
But you have to. It's like looking at produce at the grocery store. Looking. Okay, this one's not as good as this. Let's discard this, or just get something entirely different. So you can't believe that all cultures are like a completely relative thing. Like, you have to believe that some cultures are just innately better through like whatever means. Not to say that like the people are better, the land is better, the
right.
ideas are better, but somewhere you have to point it to something, and mostly it's like ideas usually. You have to be able to point to something and say that democracy is good because of this, capitalism is good because of this, and I don't think I need to convince many people that democracy or capitalism is good. But if you look at like the stats, well, I probably actually do.
You had to throw capitalism in there, didn't you?
So just real quick, if you look at like all told violence, everything from civil wars, interstate wars, violence in the home, the West has been declining steadily since like pretty much as soon as they became democracies. If you look at the graph of amount of democracies that are like emerging in the world, it's pretty coincided with less interstate wars. So if we believe in democracy and capitalism is like another leg of the triangle there to prevent violence. If we believe in these values, and we really think, and we have good evidence that they reduce violence, we should want to spread that, right?
Well, I mean, I don't think you'll find many people who are going to disagree that are going to disagree with you and say violence is bad. I think violence is good, rather. They would be disagreeing with you by saying violence is good. But I think the problem is you said the word capitalism, and my problem with that is only unfettered capitalism. Because when you take capitalism to its furthest ideal, or when you take capitalism and allow humans to go about the task of capitalism without checks on their ambition.
You have to box off some things that the market is just not going to. You have to regulate the market or box off entire things like should be healthcare that the capitalism just can't regulate.
So a quick disclosure to our listening audience: we are both emergency medical technicians working for an undisclosed ambulance company, a private ambulance company, and we see the pitfalls of capitalist healthcare systems firsthand.
Shout out to Bernie. No.
Hey Bernie, how's it going? We'll hit you up on Twitter later.
If we really believe in these things, that generally capitalism, democracy are good, and then we want them for other countries, then we have to admit that some ideas are better than others, and that we should want to propagate these ideas to other cultures. Which an example we'll get into is Iraq, wanting to instill democracy in Iraq. And before we move on, just like last little point on the British Raj, if we were to look at like the kind of the turnaround on imperialism in the West, So it started like 1500-ish, started 1600-ish, 1700-ish.
Sure, we'll go with that.
And then by the 1950s, around when Gandhi started protesting, his protest was very effective. But the reason it was effective is because the British people, they started to really accept the kind of liberal humanism ideals that there's value in all human life, and if Gandhi would have tried that out on Mussolini, it wouldn't have flown, right?
Right.
So it's kind of a reflection of the progress of ideals, right?
Sure.
So I guess what I'm saying is that there's also quick turnaround on, the more integrated we are, there's a quicker turnaround on bad ideas, which I think is another.
As in, bad ideas are swept out more quickly?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Because imperialism had a short shelf life, at least. Not short.
What, are you talking
honestly,
on a geological time scale, or
even on a human time scale? I mean,
well, yeah, in the face of 20,000 years of human, or at least years of human dominance over the planet, yeah, imperialism had
70,000
for some value of imperialism, it had a short shelf life. Imperialism, as in expansionist imperialism, yeah. There was only a couple hundred years until we figured out, hey, this might not be the greatest idea.
So, let's pivot to the Iraq War, which yeah, that's a sharp pivot. So, we have slightly different views on this. I think we're fairly close to the mark, but we disagree, I think, on whether or not the Iraq War was quote unquote good.
Let's both say where we stand on this.
Okay,
before we make philosophical conjunctures about where it is. Okay, where are we starting?
So my stance is that the Iraq War was justified, however, poorly executed.
Okay.
I don't exactly agree with the means that we used to depose Saddam, but I would agree that he had to go. Yeah, that's pretty much the stance.
Whereas I think that the period of justification for the invasion of Iraq by the U.S. pretty much by itself passed 10 years prior, or whenever it was. Was it 91?
91.
Gulf War was 91. We went in 2003, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it was 12 years prior. We would have been perfectly justified. And I'm about to jump in, which I might as well. My position is the Iraq War was not justified in the time that it was undergone.
Okay.
The way it was undergone, obviously, consequently, the way it was undergone was
not ideal.
Not to the mark to which we should hold ourselves.
Yeah. But the people who are saying that it wasn't justified, I mean, they're saying that, people can go up in flame, the Kurds getting attacked in an afternoon, 5,000 people just completely gone from chemical warfare. We're effectively saying that we are not going to intervene, no matter the casualty count, right? How much higher would it have to go to?
So here's my I have two. There are two lines of reasoning here that I've struggled with in my life. One is American solo interventionism. We have a history throughout the last.
Don't hurt yourself.
I don't know. When did we start jumping into other countries' business and being like, "Hey, Korea. Don't do that"?
Korea.
No, we were in South America before that. We were doing stuff we invaded Cuba.
We were pretty pretty isolationist after World War I, though, for a while there.
Right, but before pre-World War I, we fought the Barbary pirates.
Yeah, that was the first thing we pretty much did as a nation.
Again, that was more justified because they were directly attacking our shipping. So yeah, that makes sense for us to be the one to be like, hey, stop. But then you have a whole bunch of South American dictatorships that we propped up. We invaded Grenada. We invaded.
That was after Korea, though.
That was after. Well, again, but post you can see, especially during the Cold War. We did a lot of interventions, both directly militarily and indirectly through CIA.
So what are you struggling with?
So solo interventionism by the U.S.
Okay, so you're saying that it needs to be more of a joint. So what
because
are your...
because it's one thing for the U.S. to say we are the world's police. We are by ourselves allowed to make the decisions of who can and cannot do things. We are not the UN. We are not the world making decisions. We are one country, a dominant country. But when we step in and say we are the arbiters of what is right and what is wrong, that I have a problem with.
So is that the reason there, the lack of oversight? You're only having one party.
You have one you have one party who can't inherently can't make make decisions like that in a neutral manner. It's always going to be tinged in favor of that country. And when you want to talk about Iraq specifically, in the oil center of the world now, what was and still is the oil center of the world. Like the Persian Gulf is where a lot of oil comes from. Yes, we did just recently become the world's #1 producer of oil, but that doesn't mean that OPEC doesn't still hold a significant amount of power. And so for us to jump in 2003, 12 years after Iraq stepped out of line and invaded another country, and a coalition of nations came in and said, no. For us to come in 12 years later, finally deciding to do something about the chemical weapons that we'd been seeing for years and years and years and doing basically nothing about, that at least we can talk about, or that can be spoken of publicly. You and I have no special knowledge of any operations, but perhaps the CIA was doing things. I don't know. For us to jump in then at a time where oil prices were getting higher, I believe at least, oil prices
Probably
were getting higher.
Yeah.
There were a lot of different the invasion of Iraq was not strictly hey, let's go free these people from an oppressive dictatorship. There was very clearly other motives as well. Other very powerful interests, non-governmental interests, that went into the decision to go in and take down Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, I'm not really worried. I guess I'm not as concerned as most people are about America's interest in oil, in that if Iraq is a compliant nation that is a global world trader of oil, it probably does not have that many human rights violations, right?
If they're very key word.
If they're fully integrated to the market and compliant.
What do you mean by compliant?
I guess not belligerent to its people or other people or other nations. Then that's just a good thing.
One aspect I didn't throw in earlier, which comes to your compliance point of view, is we also, as a Christian nation, stepped into the middle of we went into Islam's backyard and said, yeah, we're just gonna knock some shit over and wreck your infrastructure, which was already in a crappy state to begin with, and just totally kick over the hornet's nest right next to Iran, one of our enemies from the 80s.
Frenemies, yeah.
No, yes, frenemies now, because we might have realized what a mistake we made back then, upholding the Shah. Which, again, talk about interventionism. We propped up a dictator who was being belligerent to his people, to use a term you used earlier. And for once, the people stood up and said, no. We're done with this. They installed a theocracy, which, not great if you were trying to propose democracy, but instead of propping up a ruler, we could have done much more there to instill democracy there instead.
I think two things that really conflated the problem in Iraq is that their scripture is expressly against any outsiders stepping foot in the Holy Land, and that how much that's actually subscribed to people. Probably a fair amount, I would imagine, at least 40%. Yeah, I do know that the other part is that their governments are their government and religions impregnated into each other, basically. And I understand that's funny.
We're such paragons of separating religion and state.
We have it written in our Constitution that there
Sure, sure.
should be different. But
we have it written in our Constitution, but we see how well that's worked for things so far.
But I mean, those two factors really, and I don't think we even need to talk about how just terrible the war was in general, even if it was technically right in principle. But something that people overlook is that I mean, Iraq could have definitely made nuclear bombs if they would have been left alone.
Sure.
For a bit of time.
There was a reactor of Osirak that the Israelis bombed.
There was no, and that was I think that was in 90s.
That was 90. I want to say 93 or 94 that Osirak got hit.
Because after the Gulf War.
Because, well, I got to interject. The Israelis decided, hey, this is a problem. Anybody else going to help us with this? No? No? Okay. Screw it. We'll take care of it ourselves.
Yeah. They didn't wait for the UN.
And they got condemned by the world for it too, yeah. Because
But it's probably the right move.
But again, it also saved the world's butt because his nuclear program was almost certainly set back because of that, the destruction of that facility, and
the invasion of the liberation of Kuwait rather, pretty much shut down the entire nuclear program. Which at the time the bomb maker, I forget his name exactly, but the Saddam's bomb maker. In 91 went on the record, wrote a book about it, talking about how close they were to making a bomb in 91, but that the intervention basically stopped that, and they planted like a centrifuge in his garden basically to like actually effectively hide the like critical components to making the bomb. Mm-hmm. But there was no like actual nuclear program in 2003 for sure.
I think by that point, the sanctions had pretty much crippled any attempts at the program he had.
Yeah.
Although, I can't remember, there were reports in 2003 about North Korea actually supplying, or actually vice versa. I think Iraq was trying to get, they were trying to support one another in nuclear ambitions. So there's that, in a point that's probably on your side more so than mine. We did also probably hamper North Korea's nuclear ambitions for a little while by shutting down Saddam.
Yeah, not like it matters now that they are nuclear.
Well, yes, now that...
That's a whole other barrel.
That's a whole other podcast, man. Let me tell you what.
Let's try to stay on the topic here. So, what are your... I guess you already told me your ideal condition for like intervening into another nation. In 91, the first Gulf War should have been deposed, so... And
quite frankly, I was.
So I guess what are your criteria what are your criteria for actually invading a country? So it seems like So I guess what did the Iraq War in 2003 not have that the Gulf War had in terms of a
global coalition?
Okay.
We kind of sort of had a coalition, but it was not a unified front like it, at least from what I've heard. Like again, I haven't studied the Gulf War extensively. I think there was doing
most of the work
in 2003. Obviously. Yes, in 91, we spearheaded it, but we had other nations intimately involved. We had the British were in it, the French were in it, like actively. Saudi Arabia was in it actively. Like we had a much more global coalition welded together. I don't know, but I'm not a military historian, listeners, so keep that in mind. I think it was in all likelihood more justified back then because they had already.
Certainly, the smoking gun of invading a sovereign nation is.
Yeah, it's like okay, no, you're gonna like he had already been a belligerent for quite some time.
Yeah.
Of any time for us to be like, you know what? He's been gassing his people, doing all sorts of crazy crap to him. He's got nuclear, biological, chemical weapons.
Yeah.
ABC, atomic. He has ABCs.
Biological warfare is basically useless. Like it's a terrible weapon.
It would have been a bad day.
It could be bad, but like mostly benign. I can't remember what terrorist group.
They were mixing anthrax and smallpox.
Yeah.
They successfully combined anthrax and smallpox together.
I forget what there's a terrorist organization in the Middle East somewhere that was trying to pioneer using chemical weapons, or not chemicals, biological weapons.
Uh-huh.
And they found that they went through like 11 tries to actually get this thing started, but they just could not find a way to actually transmit it effectively, and they just went to bombs. So like,
Biological weapons are a much more sophisticated and much more.
they cost a lot more.
They cost a
a lot
hell of a lot more, and it's hard to get them to disperse properly. It's hard to get them to spread. But the Soviets had 50 years of straight work on stuff, and it's never officially been talked about where those things are now, but after the breakup of the Soviet Union, who knows what happened?
Yeah,
Some of those stockpiles.
Probably some nuclear bombs missing. But back on track. What?
And in the end, he was deposed, and those attacks on civilians did cease, but not after more people were allowed to suffer.
So fun little stat, real quick. Kind of like so, autocracies writ large ruled by like a couple individuals, one individual. That causes the most interstate wars out of any government form. And but even bad democracies, like terrible, unrepresentative democracies that are like basically not democracies at all, they still cause less violence than those tyrannies. So I mean, even if you do it badly, you usually have less, at least interstate war.
So are we a nominal democracy or a legitimate?
That's a good question. There's a higher incidence of civil war, obviously, because there's not a repressive regime tampering down on any warring sides. But
intrastate warfare is lesser in autocracy. Yes, interstate warfare is higher with autocracies. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess how do you feel about? So some people think that the only reason Russia hasn't started seizing more states in like the Estonia area, what is that? The
Baltics, the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania.
Yes.
Those three over there.
Some people, there was a UN military practice exercise, yeah, and they found that Russia was able to like seize. There's a really narrow corridor that they can seize that's bordering Russia. I forget in which nation exactly, but they can seize that and basically cut off the UN from almost all of those countries, at least two of them. And they could just basically just take them over. And it's a real serious problem. Those nations exactly know the kind of tumultuous environment they're in. How do you feel about like American spending on like prevention of Russia revanchism when it'll like reclaim like previous territory? How do you feel about that?
See, this is where I'm internally mixed, because on the one hand, this strokes the string of why are we being the world's police?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, there's the realist in me who says, well, we're here now. We're in the position we're in, being militarily dominant, in quotation marks. And as part of protecting, like, if those countries are welcoming us to come and help them defend themselves, I don't necessarily see a problem with that.
So basically, if the majority is saying that they actually want to be Russia, nothing lost, basically.
I thought we were all about self-determination here.
Yeah, I guess I guess I'm fine with it too. I mean, I don't really have.
If a country, now again, the fraught nature of that statement is the fact that, is it actually, like, you got to figure out, is the country actually as a whole deciding we voluntarily want to, like, are they essentially a state joining the U.S., or is this a population of people who are under economic, political, insert other pressures here to reunite with Mother Russia? So it's not really a choice freely made. It's well, if you come over here, we'll stop embargoing the crap out of you.
Okay, so free of any pressures, and they're not misled in what they want.
Exactly. If a country freely decides, oh hey, let's join Russia, I mean, I guess if you want to do that to yourself, we can't really stop you. But if Russia's saying, "Hey, we're going to cut off your natural gas supplies," and it's October, or it's February. It's February. You now no longer have natural gas supplies through the pipeline that we have to you.
Literally gangster sanctions, basically.
Oh yeah, but they've done that. Like Russia's done that before to Europe.
Yeah.
Russia has been like, "Oh, I'm sorry, there's problems with the pipeline. You guys won't have heating gas now." And Europe's been like, "Oh crap, we now have to start having tankers of liquefied natural gas coming in from other places. Heating prices go through the roof. It screws with your economy. Like there's all sorts of knock-on effects from that kind of thing, where it might just be easier for a small country with not a lot of economic influence, power, resources, to fight back. You cut off somebody's heat in the middle of winter, it's not a whole lot they can do about it. They're going to go out and buy another heater so they can use their electricity instead of their gas? That's not how that works, especially not on the scale of a country.
So you'd agree that this is a pretty beneficial. It's better to prevent any kind of conflicts than to just be isolation.
I think most would agree that preventing conflicts is better than having conflicts.
Some people feel that America needs to be isolationist, and I don't think they're fully aware of the kind of the potholes we're avoiding, kind of sticking our finger in the pudding, so to speak, of everybody else.
Well, actually, so Russia is the ocean. Our policies, such as the ones you've discussed, are a dike. And there's a fable about a dike and the ocean and little holes being popped in that dike. And a little boy sticks his finger in the dike and prevents the ocean from rushing through and creating a bigger and bigger and bigger hole. And he has to sit there until someone comes along and finds him and is able to help him and raises the alarm that, hey, there's a leak in the dike, maybe somebody should come fix this. So we can either stick our finger in the dike and prevent little problems from becoming big problems, or we can let the problem get bigger and bigger and bigger until the ocean rushes in. And then you've got a bigger problem that you have to deal with.
So you're saying we need to stick our finger in Russia?
Sure. That's the way you want to think about it.
Do you agree with the statement that there's never going to be a time when strong arming other nations with it doesn't even have to be military power, but with sanctions or some kind of attack on their network, if they're not being a compliant partner, there's never going to be a time when that is not useful or used?
Sanctions are going to be used all the time. It's better, and in fact preferable, that those be used in conjunction with international cooperation and with international understanding of why those are being done. But in the case of a bilateral relationship where it literally just affects the two countries, those things are an element of the political system that's never going to go away.
Because a lot of people feel like we live in this end of history moment where there's never going to be any war, any violence, any time when nations are really disagreeing with each other, they have to actually fight over something.
There are people who think that war is over.
Oh yeah, pretty much. Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, for those at home who can't see my face right now, I have a look of confusion and incredulity.
Yeah. My position, real quick, we're going to take a break in a second, but my position looks like you do not like when the United States gets involved in these issues without support from a coalition.
Unilaterally,
yes.
One might say?
Yes. However, you could imagine a scenario where, let's say, China or Russia is being an uncompliant partner in producing AI. Say everything we think about AI is true and it's going to wreck the world if we produce it. Say that's true.
So Skynet happens in China.
Yeah, but not walking robots, crashing the network and taking
Skynet from Terminator Salvation?
Was that the
where it was the one where it was literally just oh god, he's in the bunker where the AI is the AI sends him to the bunker to survive? That one?
Yeah,
you know
sure.
What I'm talking about?
That, yeah. I've seen that movie totally, yeah.
There's not actually walking robots in that movie, I don't think. It's just literally they're constantly fighting an AI that's gradually taking over systems.
So say that's true.
Okay.
And we cannot get the UN to actually intervene in this, and we're sure that like this is going to lead to like the destruction of humanity as we know it. It seems you would agree that we should have coalition support, but in a scenario like this, it would be beneficial to like topple the government that's producing this.
Are you positing then that so let me make sure I understand your suppositions. Supposition 1, there's an AI that is taking over things to the point in a country
That will. It's likely to happen, yeah.
So there is let's just throw numbers at it. So supposition 1 is there's a 90% probability that new proprietary AI developed by the Chinese military is going to take over their nuclear capabilities. Is that...
Doesn't have to be that. They're just going to integrate. Like, say they're just going to integrate it in the like the world network. They're going to integrate it, and they're just going to let it run wild out in the network, out on the internet.
And we have a strong suspicion that this thing is just going to take over all internet connected systems.
Yes.
Okay.
And we know that is going to be bad.
Okay. Well, yes, we know that would be bad because the international economic system would collapse if that occurred.
Essentially.
So, and what your supposition 2 is then, the UN for some reason doesn't understand the nature of the threat of this AI in true action movie fashion. Or
there's just a member obfuscating for China and not,
so Russia
yeah,
decides it's not going to be, says in the Security Council, it's not going to be that big a deal. So no, you guys can't get a Security Council resolution.
We know Russia's going to veto. I mean, come on.
Well, they want a copy. Or they just want to see Vladimir Putin riding a bear at some point.
So I know I've kind of like I'm like have your arm behind your back essentially here. Like you have to say yes, right? Like there's not like no. I would want to like.
I think there are less extreme examples where intervention is still required.
Okay.
You don't like.
So
I'm not. I will not. You will never hear me say there is no condition under which the U.S. can unilaterally take action because there are certain instances under which the U.S. has to defend itself without necessarily. Now, defending itself to the point of eliminating the government of another nation would require a pretty stinking large.
It's kind of gerrymandering of the word defense, right? Like you've
heavily that is a very very heavily gerrymandered version of defense where defense has actually just been like the definitions have been erased and you've just copy pasted in the word offense.
Yeah.
Let's just. So to defend ourselves, we just need to take out the entire command chain of China. Okay, that sounds like a good idea. No.
So in summary, Vietnam was bad, okay?
Vietnam was a poor choice. And so was the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Yeah, I mean...
Did it have some good results? Yeah, yes. And no. And yes, it had some good results. It also had some crappy results. Because, we kicked the chalk out from, I used this metaphor with you the other week, and I'll use it again for the podcast. Sabrina and I were talking about this the other week, sitting in our ambulance, driving around, and we were talking about the Iraq War and how I was describing one of the knock-on effects of the invasion in 2003 was the re-emergence of humongous sectarian tensions in Iraq. And I don't know. That seems like a downside that's significantly downplayed by a lot of people who are in favor, who continue to be in favor of the invasion of Iraq in 2003, is like
some people were taken to the street and literally killed with drills, like getting their brains drilled out like a drill.
Yeah,
like pretty barbaric stuff. That's like movie material that like you wouldn't expect to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you that's the problem is when you come in and take out Saddam, who was gassing his own people. Like Saddam, do not get me wrong, listeners. Saddam was a terrible person. Okay, like I'm not here supporting Saddam and here being like, hey, we should have left him in power. No, he was a terrible person who deserved everything he got.
I'm gonna link it, but there's a video you can watch. Have you seen the video of him like taking half the Ba'ath Party out behind the whatever building they're in?
No, but I remember this.
Yeah, about that. So he has someone call names. He's just sitting ominously on like the podium.
I have seen that one before.
And he's smoking
just,
a cigar,
walking out the door.
Yeah,
and they're just like you, and then all they hear is like machine gun fire.
And he has the half that weren't called
Uh-huh.
actually execute the people out back.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was on live TV. Live TV.
Again, listeners, just to be clear, I am not pro Saddam. He was a horrible, terrible person who deserved to be hung several times over. Unfortunately, we have
Only got the once. Yeah.
we only have but the one life to live and to give to our nation. And unfortunately, he was able to hold on to his nation far longer than he should have been able to, or at least should have been allowed to.
Yeah.
But again, because he wasn't able to continue, the sectarian violence was kept at bay for 12 more years than it would have otherwise.
So basically, the rolling boulder of murder was stopped by, a chalk block.
The
was
rolling
put
border
under it.
of literally 1,000 years of sectarian tension between the two major factions, the two main denominations,
Yeah, there
to
you go.
steal a word from Christianity, of
Cultural appropriation. Stop using that word.
yeah, for lack of a better word, listeners, the two most populous denominations of Islam were held apart by the threat of actual genocidal violence against individual tribes by Saddam. Like, he just basically said, "No, you guys have to stop fighting now, or I will kill all of you."
Basically, he's like, stop killing each other. I'm going to kill you. And he killed some of them. And then the U.S. was like, hey, stop killing people. And then,
Yeah.
or we're going to kill you. And we killed people. But then they went back to killing each other too. So
Yeah. So was Saddam good? In very limited ways,
Yeah.
yes, and far outweighed by the negative he did. But he did keep the two sides from fighting one another just by killing both sides himself when he needed to, in his mind.
I think that's a good wrap point.
Yay! Saddam was bad, except when he was slightly okay.
Slightly not so bad.
Slightly not as evil by stopping people from killing one another over some decently significant but ultimately, unfortunately, divisive religious issues.
So thanks for coming on the podcast, Barak. I enjoyed.
I didn't have a choice. You showed up at my doorstep.
It's kind of demanding, yeah.
Yeah.
It was just here.